have so much to go over. I need you to give me all the details on the Menendez brothers because last time we spoke, we weren't sure if Lyle and Eric would ever be resentenced. Now they've had a sentence of 50 to life, which means they're getting that parole hearing. But first and foremost, I need to know what was your initial reaction to hearing this news?
I don't think that I was that surprised, right? We've seen the public outcry for more compassion for them and to consider the totality of everything that they allegedly experienced at the hands of their parents and then the sympathy and support that they have from their family is unbelievable. I believe that justice, when we look at justice, we have to really listen to the victims and the survivors of a crime. I think their voices should be heard. And in this case, almost unanimously, the family has said, we want them to be released. They have served enough time. Now, I may not like the fact, and a lot of other people may not like the fact that these two young men, well, now they're in their 50s, were and are cold-blooded killers. Clearly, they had some kind of a moral, emotional, mental defect in order to be able to shoot their parents dead and then go on about their lives as if nothing had happened and they lied and they covered up, and there have to be consequences for that. So it's a tough one. I've spent many years advocating for the rights of survivors and for the victims. And in this case, it's the Menendez family. So, like I said, I may not like the outcome if they do get paroled, but I understand.
Do you feel like the show Monsters had any bearing on where we are today? Because a lot of fans said that that show gave this case a new voice, a case that was 30 something years old, and brought it back to the forefront. Now, a lot of us have known this case our whole lives, so it was always kind of in the back of our heads, especially living in LA. But do you think that show had any bearing on how hard people went on social media, how the family's spoken out, how Lyle and Eric have now become these big media presence? Do you think it's impacted that?
I do believe that the show had an impact. I also believe the documentary did. I also believe that Kim Kardashian writing her essay about why she believed that we should judge them based on how we all now view the kind of sexual abuse they say that they experienced. So I think there's been a groundswell of support to have their case re-examined based on how we now understand victims of crime, meaning that they were victims here. But as I've said before to you, if every child who was abused killed their parents, we'd have a lot of dead parents, right? And what I ask myself over and over again, this was clearly premeditated. They had so many opportunities not to kill their parents, not to kill their parents, yet they went through with this plan, and then it was the cover up afterwards. Now, here's the other thing, Alexandra. I have also seen other convicted killers spend a fraction of the time behind bars that these two have. I mean, is that fair? I mean, there was a case in Texas I covered where this man killed an 11-year-old girl. He sexually abused her, he killed her, and he threw her in a trash bin. He served only 11 years for that murder. That's not right, and that's not fair. So where is the fairness in our justice system? Have they served enough time for their murders?
Right. So when people say the justice system is broken, these are the types of cases they're speaking about. How do you reconcile with that? Because you're someone who spends so much time with the victims' families. How does that weigh on you, and how have you seen it be impacted over the years?
I do believe in trying to truly understand an entire case, the entirety of what happened in the commission of this crime, right? I think that that's important to understand what they were thinking when they did this. But here's the thing, it doesn't appear that it was in self-defense. So that to me is problematic. I hear the Menendez family speaking loudly and clearly to every judge who will listen to them, every prosecutor who will listen to them, that they believe that Lyle and Eric have already served enough time, something, 35 years in prison. Is that enough for a murder? For some cases, it is. And let's keep in mind, they're still in prison. They haven't been released yet. What has happened is now they are eligible for parole. Well, in the state of California, the parole rate of inmates who go before the board and are actually released, 14%. That's the last statistic we have in California. A lot of people view California as being a very liberal state, but if you look at the parole rate of 14%, that's not a parole board that lets people out easily. So they're not out yet. I think what's also interesting that just happened is that the parole board hearing was scheduled for June 13th. Now that's been pushed back to two dates in August, August 21st and 22nd. And one of the brothers actually said on Facebook that they thought it was a good idea because it gives them more time to prepare, more time for the defense, their attorneys to present, because a lot's going to happen in this parole hearing.
Right. Just looking into this case from an outside's perspective, what do you think the parole board will do? Is there an inkling that you have that they're going to vote one way or another? I had no idea about 14%, and that is so low. Like you said, for a state that is so liberal as people think, wow, that is a low number.
Yeah, it really is. That's the latest statistic we have on that. So there are 21 commissioners on the board of parole. It's a full-time job. I happen to know one of them because I covered him for years. He was an LA city councilman, and before that, he was an assistant prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he was focusing on white-collar crimes. So at least one person on that board, and I'm not saying that the others aren't at all, don't have this kind of a background. I just happen to personally know him from covering him for years in Los Angeles, Jack Weiss, that he certainly has that law enforcement background, clearly. The parole board has a lot of steps. And when the hearing starts, there are going to be a lot of questions. Like they will both Eric and Lyle will be questioned by the members of the parole board who are there. They, as inmates, actually are also allowed to ask questions. It's a totally different thing than being in a courtroom. Additionally, what the parole board is looking for, they're going to ask things, something's called a statement of personal change that can be written by the inmate if they wish to. But that's basically their explanation to the board, what they were thinking at the time, why they did it, what they now know, and how they've been rehabilitated. I've read a lot of parole board records, a lot of hearings. I've read a lot of them. And what I see a lot is if you deny your crime, like if you're still saying that you're innocent, if you're still saying that you didn't kill him or her, the parole board doesn't like that. They want to hear you admit to your crime. They want to see that you've been rehabilitated. And they really want you to take responsibility. So that's going to be really important. The other thing is, what's the plan if they're released? So they're going to ask for letters of support. In these letters of support, the parole board wants to know, okay, if we release you tomorrow, where exactly are you going? Do you have a support system? Who will help you financially? Where will you be housed? How will we make sure that you can get to whatever meetings that you have to with your probation officer, your parole officer? I believe that because the Menendez family has been so active, right? So active in trying to release them, that's not going to be a hurdle for them. I think you're going to have at least a dozen people saying, we got this. We're going to take care of them, and we've set this all up. So that's something in their favor. But the question is the violence. It is the level of violence in this crime and the complete disregard for human life. How are you going to explain this?
Right. And yes, it happened so many years ago and they were juveniles, but like you said, the violence is so heavy. And it's so funny because I was watching this show, an old show with Patricia Arquette, Medium, and she works in a DA's office and they were going to the parole hearing and they were speaking about how the district attorney can also speak and they really take into account what he thinks and what he wants. Now, we've had a switch in DA since this case has been turned over to Nathan, but he is still against it. He's saying that he doesn't feel like the brothers are rehabilitated and that he doesn't feel like they've taken accountability for their actions. Can you see where he's coming from with that?
I do. Nathan Hochman, the new district attorney, has tried to block everything He does not believe that they are rehabilitated. And he didn't want them to be resentenced. In fact, it was so interesting. You rarely have the actual DA arguing a case in court, but this time he stood with the other prosecutor assigned to the case and argued the case before the judge. That's how strongly the DA feels about this. Is he happy with the decision, the resentencing? No. He has said that he will, or his prosecutors will be attending the parole board hearings. And I think he's going to make his case as to why he believes he described them in that hearing as being a moderate risk to society. And that's actually one of the biggest hurdles that the parole board has to figure out. Are you a risk to society? So I don't know the answer to that question. I've always said, my opinions are whatever they are. It's the system that will bear this out. And I think that one thing we've seen so clearly is no matter how much everyone has screamed and said, we need to see some change, we have. Change has been effected. Their sentence has been reduced. They are now eligible for parole, but they're still not free. They have a hurdle. And then even when the parole board rules on this, let's say they decide that they're eligible for parole, then it's like a 90-day review. And then the governor can either agree and sign off or deny. So it could still be months, right? It could still be Thanksgiving before they are released, if they are released. Also, this is the first time they are coming before the parole board. What I don't have the statistic on, which I think is fascinating, is of the first time applicants to the parole board, how many of those actually have to come back again and again and again and again until they get parole? That's fascinating.
So this is their first hearing. Is it normal for them to get a hearing so quickly, or is it just how the system's working with them?
I think in this one there was a little political behind the scenes, action going on here. This is why I think so. If you may recall that Governor Newsom had asked the parole board to put together a report on what they believed was the risk and just overall background on Eric and Lyle as inmates because he was considering clemency. But he asked the parole board to prepare a report on them. The date that was originally scheduled in June was for that clemency process. That got changed when they were resentenced, and then it became a parole hearing because they became eligible for parole. And then the parole board said, oh, hold on a second. No, we're not ready yet. Let's move this to August. We need 2 more months. One thing that has always bothered me about them, about Eric and Lyle, is how many more Eric and Lyles are there behind bars with similar circumstances? And they're not getting the support and attention and maybe the compassion that they are getting. And that goes to fairness for me. And that's what I think about a lot. They're so high profile. It's all about them. What about the others?
Right. Are there any cases that you've seen that firsthand happen in that have stuck with you and come to mind?
Well, for me, it's the wrongful conviction, right? For me, you never want an innocent person ever to lose their freedom because of either some kind of conspiracy, corruption, or even an accident, an error. But when it comes to the idea of lowering a sentence, I can't say I'm as sympathetic. I'm sorry. We also have something here in California that's kind of new in the last few years, and it's compassionate release. And I got to tell you, I have a huge problem with that because if you show no mercy and compassion when you take someone's life, there was a case that I covered where a man was convicted, a husband was convicted of brutally murdering his pregnant wife and leaving her body in the bathtub. And he got released because he was dying of, I believe, cancer, but he had a terminal illness. And the parole board is like, oh, you know what? We're going to show you some compassion and let you die with some dignity. And I am like, hold on a second. No, you took 2 lives. No,
Right.
no dignity and compassion for you.
And last time we spoke, we said we would love to see Eric and Lyle do some good if they got out, give back to the community. And I watched this documentary, Unleashing Hope with Rosie O'Donnell. And Lyle is part of a prisoners program where they train guide dogs to work with autistic children and vets with PTSD. So that's what he's been doing behind bars. And then Cooper Kosh, who played Eric in Monsters, said that Eric wants to dedicate his life to prison reform and working with those who have life without parole. Do you think what the brothers are doing behind bars is going to impact the parole hearing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you have a choice, right? These actions and these things that they've been doing for the betterment of others, right? These positive things that they've been doing behind prison. Think about it. They've had no possibility of parole. So what's the point? You could either act badly in prison or be a model citizen. It's like a moral decision that you have to make, meaning you do good because it may not get you out because you don't have a chance of getting out. It's not like they just started doing this. So I think that that's important. Rehabilitation is a huge part of the penal system, right? That's the whole point. Can you be rehabilitated? And if they can show that they have been good and they've tried to help others, I think that that's important. I mean, that shows a lot about them. But it's interesting for each point that someone will say, and look at all the good they've done, the DA will come back and say something else. Like one of the things he said in the hearing about why he thinks that they're not model citizens is that they've each been caught with a contraband phone. And I'm like thinking to myself, okay, hold on a second. We're talking about a double homicide here, right? Two people being killed versus having a contraband phone. Like, look, if you think you're never getting out of prison, there's something called prison life. You just got to get by. So, I mean, do I find that to be an offense worthy of denying them parole? No, I don't. I don't think that's the biggest problem. So things like that, is it great? No, but I have seen prisoners use contraband phones to torment the victims that they have been convicted of harming. That's a different situation.
Right,
You know,
that's horrible. I'm sure Lyle and Eric maybe wanted to say goodnight to the wives, but
right
what
there
you're
you go.
talking about is terrible. Yeah, and I want to switch gears just for a second about another case, just quickly to get your opinion on the Karen Reed trial, because I have to say I've never in my life done jury duty twice on the same case. I'm like watching from start to end last time, and then when they retried her, I was like, I have to do jury duty again, guys, at my boot camp. I'm like one earphone in listening to the trial. What do you make of this case? Because it to me is so insane. I can see both sides, the conspiracy of it all, but also if it's just Occam's razor, right? Like the most obvious answer is what it is. Where do you stand with this?
Oh my gosh, this is quite a case, right? It is mind-boggling. Um, I always look at when I look at a crime, it's usually kind of common sense. You may not agree with it, but it's usually the most logical thing, right? I always say when you hear the truth, it kind of just, oh yeah, that makes sense. I think the most likely thing that happened was that she ran him over with the car. I'm not even going to say intentionally. It's even possible that it was just an accident because the two of them had been drinking so much. I think that's still entirely possible. It's really up to the jury to decide. I think it's very interesting. They had that expert on who was part of the first trial, and then he's for the prosecution. Now he's part of the second trial, and talking about how he kind of rejiggered some of the metrics on speed of driving, how the victim was perhaps hit, and then how the bruises and all of that lined up with the vehicle. The one thing, I don't know what your opinion is. Okay. In the first trial, we had what I call that really dirty trooper, right? The one who was just said horrible things about her, was clearly biased.
Trooper
And right
Proctor,
after,
yes.
right after the hung jury, he gets booted as he should have been. And I really wish that they had fired his ass much earlier than that. I think he was a huge liability. He was a huge liability for the prosecution. And I've talked to a few, my girlfriends are obsessed with this trial. And I've said to them, so what do you think now that it's all out in the open that he was a liar and that he was biased and all this, and they finally take an action, like, do you see that that makes the prosecution now seem more, I don't know, transparent and perhaps more truthful? And they're just like, you either believe she did or she didn't. There's like no gray area here, but I live in the gray.
I know, me too, because when I hear the prosecution plead their case, it just makes so much sense. Like the most obvious thing is why would there be this whole conspiracy? I think, like you said, not intentional, probably didn't even realize she hit him, and that's what happened. But then sometimes when I hear the defense, I'm thinking, why were all those butt dials happening?
Yeah.
Why was the Google thing happening at 2 a.m.? How long did Dines know? I mean, they have some good points there. So it really
Yes.
brings me back to why did you sell your house below market? Get rid of the dog,
The dog. Oh
delete
my
all those
God, the
pets.
dog.
Right.
Why did they get rid of the dog?
So it's just, I mean, it really gets your wheel spinning. It makes me question it, but I'm definitely hooked. And do you have a verdict? Are you leaning towards one way or the other? Because I do think the prosecution is delivering the case much better this time around.
I think you're right about that. I think it's a clear case on the prosecution side, but I still think that defense is able to muddy things enough to say, oh, hold on a second. Is there reasonable doubt here? So I think that's still in play. Gosh, I don't know. I really, I'm not going to guess on this one.
Yeah.
Maybe the most unpredictable thing would be another hung jury.
At that point, I just want the prosecutions to hang up their hat. I can't go
They're
through this
done.
again. Yeah,
Right, they're done. If you
they're
get an,
done.
and don't you find it interesting that a former juror is now a consultant to Karen Reed and her case? I mean, it really is a fascinating case.
I know. I'm looking out for the Netflix movie. I'm like, I need to see this like reenacted in Netflix because that is insane. I mean, when does that happen? How is that even illegal, like legal to have the juror come over and join? I thought that was crazy, but he was passionate. They believed she was innocent.
It's very smart move. Now I have a question for you, because I thought you were going to ask me about the Sean Combs trial. What do you think's going on there?
Wow, that is such a heavy one. I have always loved Cassie. I feel when she spoke out, you've always heard rumblings throughout this trial, but when she really took the stand and spoke, I just thought that's still the deal. There is no way, I don't think anyone on that jury could see it any other way that he is a monster and the things he's done. Now, what's so interesting to me is the fact that his daughters, who are young girls, just had their prom. They stand by him. His son stands by him. So that aspect is really hard because he does have children who are going to bear the brunt of his actions, and that's really sad. And I know Kim Porter has passed, so they don't have a mom, and now their dad's being accused of these awful things. But it is just heinous. I think it is so sad how Hollywood, hid this for so long, and his peers. I mean, I think about Beyonce and Jay-Z and people he was friends with, Kanye, who's gone off the deep end. Like, this was his inner circle, and I just can't believe that this was going on behind the scenes for so long. It is so sad.
So here's a question I have for you about this case. I agree with you that based on the testimony, he comes across as a violent monster. Clearly evidence, if you believe the testimony, which I do, of being an incredibly violent, manipulative man. My, my question is, the racketeering part of this, has that part been proven clearly yet?
I think that part has been muddled and lost. I think that we have not seen much about the racketeering yet. It's sprinkled in, and if he is found guilty, then all that money that would go to the kids, right? If he went to prison for other reasons, it's gone. Like they want to take that and say all of your company has been used for racketeering and all those awful things. But yeah, no, I feel like we've gotten really stuck into who he is as a person, not much about what the corporation or the business has done. All the
And I'm waiting.
testimony, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
waiting.
I think we're getting there because we have more assistants, testifying now. So maybe you'll be able to see a pattern. I mean, clearly he appears to be an incredibly abusive human being, but domestic violence is not a charge that he's facing. So that's why I really want to see the broader picture. And I think one of the other observations that's fascinating to me is then when prosecutors came out, and indicted him, and they talked about the freak offs as, I mean, based on the way it was being described to me as being these massive things like massive orgies, so far the testimony's been pretty limited to Sean Combs, Cassie, and then perhaps a sex worker. And I haven't, I mean, have we seen any testimony yet about massive orgies and all this other stuff that was alluded to? And also the jurors, I guess there are some tapes about the freak offs and the jurors haven't seen them. These jurors are going to need years of therapy after this.
Yeah. Well, that's the question I have. I always think when you see jurors, you're supposed to base it on obviously the evidence and is it with a reasonable doubt or not. But when you see the emotional aspect of this, a pregnant woman crying on the stand, and I mean, how can you not look at this man and despise him? Do you really think that jurors can vote without that emotional attachment? Because we are human. Or do you think that that does weigh in pretty heavily during crimes like this?
No, I think she was very powerful. She was very, very powerful, and she was in a horrible position, and she was horribly abused. And I think that there have been some very mean comments about why didn't she just leave? When you're under someone's control and you fear for your life, for heaven's sakes, according to her testimony and what her mother said, he was threatening to release videos and he made her own mother give him money not to. I mean, that's sick.
Yeah.
That's like really sick stuff if all of that is true. So I just, of course, the jurors are going to, I think we all agree, based on the testimony, this man is violent and is a monster. What I'm questioning is, can they show a greater pattern with his business and his employees? And I think we're getting there. And honestly, I don't think you have to show a lot. I think you have to show more of it. And that's what I'm waiting for in the trial. But, they still have a few more weeks to go, the prosecution.
Right. Can you make a verdict with this one? You think it's leaning towards
You,
guilty?
when it comes to federal cases, generally I mean, the feds are generally very well prepared, right? There is a ton of evidence. They have a lot of visual evidence, right? There's a lot of testimony. I think once the prosecution finishes, if they can, it's the racketeer. I think they touched on the kidnapping with the last two assistants, right? I think the allegations are sounding truthful there based on their testimony. So now we just have to get this enterprise, a criminal enterprise. What we haven't completely heard from is we need some other victims, I think, who may have been drugged, for example, and taken advantage of and may have been trafficked. And that's all part of the racketeering and trafficking. And I'm waiting for those components of the case.